Rain hammered the windows as Callista Monroe, a single mom on the brink, sent her live location to the only man who once promised never to fail her. One trembling digit slipped. Across town, Liam Harrington, a billionaire who delivered roses weekly to a grave, checked a buzzing phone. "Please, just come. She's burning up." Minutes later, his Bentley sliced through the storm, roses on the seat, regret in his chest. When the door opened, he faced a stranger, a feverish child, and a plea that would reroute both their fates. Callista Monroe was 29 years old, and every year of it showed in the hollows beneath her eyes. Her brown hair was pulled back in a knot she'd tied without a mirror, and her thrift store jacket hung loose on shoulders that carried more than their share. She worked the evening shift at Harbor and Hearth, a waterfront cafe where the tips were unpredictable and the customers often less kind than they could be. Tonight, she'd clocked out early, her hands shaking too hard to pour a straight cup of coffee. The apartment she shared with her daughter was small, the kind of small that made every sound echo. The radiator clanked. The neighbors upstairs argued in muffled tones. And in the corner bedroom, Astrid Monroe, 5 years old and too small for her age, burned with a fever that wouldn't break. Callista had tried everything. Cool cloths. Lukewarm baths. The last of the children's fever reducer, scraped from a bottle she'd been rationing for 2 weeks. Nothing worked. Astrid's cheeks were flushed scarlet, her breathing fast and shallow. And when Callista pressed her palm to that small forehead, the heat made her stomach drop. The hospital bills from last month still sat unpaid on the counter. Her credit card had been declined twice that week. The rent was 7 days overdue, and the landlord's voicemails were getting less polite. She was out of options and out of time, so she did the one thing she'd sworn she'd never do. She opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she hadn't touched in 5 years. Clinton Reed, the man who'd left the moment he found out she was pregnant, who'd promised support and delivered silence, who owed her more than money but had never paid even that. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, then typed instead, because she couldn't trust her voice not to break. "Please, just come. She's burning up." She attached her live location and hit send before she could talk herself out of it. What Callista didn't know was that her cracked phone screen had betrayed her. One digit, smudged by a shaking thumb, had shifted. The message went not to Clinton Reed, but to a number 1 digit away, to a man she'd never met. Liam Harrington sat in the back of his Bentley, the engine idling outside the cemetery gates. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the world into watercolor grays and blacks. On the passenger seat beside him lay a bouquet of red roses, their stems wrapped in brown paper, their petals perfect. He brought them every week. Same day, same time, same flowers. It had been 6 years since the accident. 6 years since the woman he'd planned to marry had called him from a taxi in a storm, her voice small and cold, asking him to come. He'd been in a meeting, an important one, he'd told himself. He'd promised to leave in 10 minutes. He'd meant it, but 10 minutes had turned to 20, and 20 to 30. And by the time he'd finally walked out of that boardroom, she was gone. The taxi had hydroplaned on a slick bridge. The driver survived. She didn't. Liam had built an empire since then. Harrington Industries was a name that opened doors, moved markets, commanded rooms. But every week, he came here with roses, as if repetition could rewrite the past, as if being on time now could matter, even though it was 6 years too late. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, expecting his assistant Serena Whitmore with some midnight crisis that couldn't wait. Instead, he saw an unknown number and a message that made his blood freeze. "Please, just come. She's burning up." Below it, a live location pin, an address on the east side, near the docks. For a moment, he couldn't move. The words echoed in his head, layered over a memory he'd never stop hearing. "I'm cold, Liam. Please come." He didn't think. He just acted. "Finn," he said, his voice cutting through the rain. "Change of plans. East side. Fast. Finn Douglas, His driver for the last decade didn't ask questions. He shifted into gear, and the Bentley pulled away from the cemetery, the roses still on the seat. The past still clinging to Liam's chest like a second skin. Callista heard the knock 20 minutes later. She'd been pacing the apartment, Astrid limp in her arms, whispering prayers she didn't quite believe in. The knock was firm, insistent, and when she stumbled to the door and pulled it open, she found a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that was soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. In one hand, he held a phone. In the other, a bouquet of red roses, rain-drenched and vivid against the gray night. "Who are you?" Callista's voice cracked. The man held up the phone, screen facing her. "You sent this." She stared. The message. Her location. Her plea. But this wasn't Clinton. This wasn't anyone she knew. "There's been a mistake," she started. But then Astrid whimpered. A thin sound that cut through the confusion, and the man's expression shifted. The distance in his eyes evaporated. "How long has she been like this?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Hours. I tried everything. I can't." Callista's words tangled. She hated how she sounded. Desperate. Helpless. "Do you have a thermometer?" He was already moving, setting the roses on the cluttered kitchen counter, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling a doctor." "What's her name?" "Astrid." "Astrid," he repeated, softer. He dialed, spoke in low, efficient tones. And within minutes, a plan was in motion. He asked questions Callista didn't know she should be answering when the fever started. What medications she'd tried. Whether Astrid had any underlying conditions. "She has a heart thing," Callista whispered. "Congenital." "Mild. She's supposed to have regular checkups. But it's okay," he said. And the way he said it made her believe him. Just for a moment. "Help is coming." Dr. Amanda Price arrived within the half hour, her medical bag in hand, her manner brisk but kind. She took Astrid's temperature 103.4, listened to her heart, checked her oxygen saturation, and worked with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen this before. "It's a respiratory infection," Amanda said, her voice steady. "Possibly exacerbated by the underlying cardiac condition. We need to bring the fever down carefully, monitor her through the night, and schedule a follow-up for imaging and labs tomorrow." She showed Callista the proper way to sponge bathe Astrid, the correct dosage of medication, the signs to watch for. Liam stood back, silent, his hands in his pockets, his suit dripping onto the worn linoleum. When Amanda finally left, promising to return in the morning, Callista sank onto the edge of the couch, Astrid curled against her, breathing easier now. The stranger Liam, Amanda had called him, was still there, standing in the kitchen like he wasn't sure whether to leave or stay. "Thank you," Callista said. It felt impossibly small. He shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I don't even know you." "No," he agreed. "You don't." He moved toward the door, then paused. He picked up his jacket from where he'd draped it over a chair. And, instead of putting it on, he walked back and laid it gently over Callista's shoulders. It was warm, expensive, and smelled faintly of cedar and rain. "Get some rest," he said. "Amanda will be back tomorrow." And then he was gone, leaving only the roses on the counter and a dozen unanswered questions in his wake. Morning came pale and tentative. Astrid woke with clear eyes and a cooler forehead, and the first thing she said was, "Who was the man with the flowers?" Callista didn't have an answer. Over the next week, Liam Harrington became a fixture in Callista's world, though she never quite understood how. He appeared at Harbor and Hearth on her evening shifts, always sitting at the corner table by the window, always ordering black coffee and leaving a tip 3 times the cost of the drink. He never made a show of it, never drew attention. Just left the bills folded neatly under the saucer, and disappeared before she could protest. Helen Brooks, the cafe manager, noticed. She noticed everything. "You got yourself a regular," she said one night, her tone somewhere between curious and cautious. "That's Liam Harrington." "You know who he is?" Callista shook her head. "Billionaire. Owns half the city." And he's leaving you $50 tips on $5 coffees. Helen's eyes narrowed. What'd you do to earn that? Nothing, Callista said. And it was the truth. She hadn't asked for any of it. But Liam kept coming. And each time, he brought something small. A children's book tucked under his arm. A bag of groceries he claimed he'd bought by mistake. And always, on the table beside his coffee cup, a single rose. Not red anymore. White. Soft and clean, and somehow easier to accept than the dramatic bouquet from that first night, Astrid noticed. She noticed everything, too, in the way only 5-year-olds can. One afternoon, when Liam stopped by the apartment to drop off a referral for a pediatric cardiologist Amanda had recommended, Astrid presented him with a drawing. It was done in crayon, all bright lines and unsteady shapes. A woman with brown hair, a small girl holding her hand, and a tall man holding a rose. That's you, Astrid said, pointing at the man. You're the one who brings roses. My mom says roses mean someone cares. Liam took the drawing carefully, as if it were made of glass. Can I keep this? Astrid nodded. You can put it somewhere important. Hey, did. The next time Callista saw him, she glimpsed it through the open door of his office, when Amanda mentioned meeting him there to coordinate Astrid's care plan. The drawing was framed, hanging on the wall behind his desk, surrounded by diplomas and awards and things that mattered to the world. But the crayon rose held the center. The truth was, Liam didn't know how to explain what he was doing or why. He only knew that the night he'd received that message, something inside him had cracked open, a door he'd thought sealed shut. For 6 years, he'd been going through motions, meetings, deals, profits, roses on a grave, purpose without meaning, success without point. But when he'd walked into that apartment and seen Callista holding her daughter, exhausted and terrified and still standing, something had shifted. She hadn't asked him to save her. She'd asked someone else entirely. He'd just been the one who showed up, and for the first time in 6 years, he'd arrived on time. Still, he kept his distance. He helped where he could. Quietly, without expectation. He paid Amanda's fees under the table. He arranged for a sliding scale payment plan at the hospital. He made sure Astrid's prescriptions were filled and waiting at the pharmacy Callista passed on her way home from work. He never asked for credit. Never made it about himself. Because he'd learned the hard way that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about showing up. Again and again. Even when no one was watching. One evening, a drunk customer got loud. He was a regular. The kind who tipped poorly and complained often. And tonight, he'd had enough whiskey to forget his manners entirely. He leaned too close to Callista while she refilled his coffee, his words slurred and ugly. Come on, sweetheart. Smile for me. You'd get better tips if you were nicer. Callista's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She'd learned when to fight and when to let things slide. But Liam hadn't. He stood, walked to the counter, and placed a crisp $100 bill on the bar. I'll cover his tab, he said evenly. And around for the house. Helen looked up, surprised. The drunk customer blinked. Confused, Liam turned to him, his voice low and calm. Leave her with dignity. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even particularly loud. But something in Liam's tone made the man sober up just enough to nod and leave, taking his coat and his shame with him. Callista stared at Liam. Something complicated, flickering across her face. Gratitude. Yes. But also wariness. She wasn't used to being protected. She was used to protecting herself. You didn't have to do that, she said when her shift ended, and they stood outside in the cool night air. I know. I don't need you to fight my battles. I know that too. He met her eyes. I just wanted him to know someone was paying attention. She didn't have a response for that. So she just nodded, pulled her jacket tighter, and walked home. But the next morning, she found a white rose tucked into Astrid's lunchbox, wrapped in a note that read, "For being brave." Astrid showed it to every kid in her kindergarten class. The calm didn't last. 2 weeks later, Clinton Reed reappeared. He showed up at the cafe near closing time, his smile too bright, his cologne too strong. He looked the same as he had 5 years ago, handsome in a careless way, charming in a practiced way, dangerous in a way Callista had learned to recognize too late. "Callista," he said, like they were old friends, "you look good." She didn't smile. "What do you want, Clinton? I heard you've been struggling. Thought I'd check in. See how Astrid's doing." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Clinton hadn't asked about Astrid in 5 years. Hadn't sent money, hadn't called, hadn't even acknowledged her existence outside the legal minimum required by the state, which was nothing, since he'd never been officially named on the birth certificate. But now he was here, and Callista's instincts screamed warning. "She's fine," Callista said carefully. "We're fine. I saw a man leaving your building the other day. Fancy car, nice suit." Clinton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You trading up?" Callista's hands tightened on the rag she was using to wipe down tables. "That's none of your business. It is if you're bringing strange men around my daughter." "Your daughter?" The words came out sharp. "You lost the right to call her that the day you walked out." Clinton's expression hardened. "I've been talking to a lawyer, Callista. I have rights. And if you're living some kind of unstable lifestyle, letting billionaires play house while you're barely keeping the lights on, a judge might think Astrid's better off with me." The threat landed like a fist. Callista felt the air leave her lungs. "You don't want her," she said quietly. "You just don't want to pay." Clinton shrugged. "Custody means I wouldn't have to." "Worth considering, don't you think?" He left before she could respond, and Callista stood in the empty cafe, shaking. Liam didn't know about the confrontation. Not right away. He'd been keeping a respectful distance, visiting less often, giving Callista space to breathe. He told himself it was the right thing to do, that she needed room, that he was just a stranger who'd happened to show up at the right time. But the truth was more complicated. He'd seen the way Clinton looked at him the one time their paths crossed outside Callista's building. He'd heard the accusation in the other man's voice. "You think money fixes everything?" And Liam had realized, with a sinking feeling, that maybe he was the problem. Maybe his presence was making things harder. Maybe he was just another man trying to insert himself into a life that didn't need him. So he pulled back. He stopped visiting the cafe. He stopped leaving roses. He told himself it was for her own good. What he didn't realize was that his absence hurt more than his presence ever had. Astrid asked about him every day. "Where's the rose man? Is he coming back?" Callista didn't have an answer. She told herself it didn't matter, that she'd managed alone before, and she'd manage alone again, that she didn't need anyone, least of all a billionaire with a savior complex and a habit of disappearing when things got complicated. But late at night, when Astrid's fever spiked again and the hospital bills stacked higher and Clinton's threats echoed in her head, she found herself staring at her phone, at the number Liam had left just in case, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to want help. She didn't call, but she did send a message. Just one line. "You were never a mistake." Liam read it at 2 a.m, sitting in his office, staring at Astrid's crayon drawing on the wall. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, he showed up at the hospital where Callista had taken Astrid for an emergency appointment. Amanda Price had squeezed them in after another fever episode, this one worse than the last. Astrid's oxygen levels had dipped. Her heart murmur was more pronounced. Amanda's expression was grave. "We need to run a full cardiac workup," Amanda said, "and likely schedule a minor intervention. Nothing major, but not something we can put off." Callista nodded, numb. She'd already run the numbers in her head. She didn't have them. That's when Liam walked in, a bouquet of white roses in his hand. "I'm sorry I stayed away," he said quietly. Callista looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed, her shoulders bowed. "Why are you here?" "Because you told me I wasn't a mistake." He set the roses down on the chair beside her. "And because I've spent 6 years being late to the things that matter. I don't want to do that anymore." He turned to Amanda. "What does she need?" Amanda glanced at Callista, who nodded, too tired to argue. a full cardiac ultrasound, blood work, possibly a catheter-based procedure to assess the valve function, and a care plan that includes regular follow-ups and monitoring. Set it up, Liam said. I'll cover the immediate costs, but not as charity. He looked at Callista, as an investment, in something that actually matters. Callista wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need his money, his pity, his roses. But Astrid was lying on the exam table, small and pale, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Okay, she whispered. Liam knelt beside her chair, his eyes level with hers. You gave me something I haven't had in a long time, he said. A reason to show up. On time. Where it counts. She didn't know what to say, so she just reached out and took his hand and held on. The intervention went smoothly. Astrid came through with flying colors, her heart stronger, her prognosis better. Amanda prescribed a care plan medication, regular checkups, a structured routine, and for the first time in months, Callista felt like she could breathe. But Clinton's threat still loomed. Liam didn't wait for her to ask. He contacted Henry Whitaker, a family law attorney with a reputation for being both brilliant and compassionate. Henry took the case without hesitation. We're going to document everything, Henry said in their first meeting. Every medical appointment, every expense, every interaction with Clinton Reed. We're going to show that you're not just stable, you're thriving, and that any attempt to claim custody is about avoiding financial responsibility, not about caring for Astrid. He paused, looking at Liam. And we're going to be very clear that Mr. Harrington's support is supplementary, not substitutive. You're the parent. He's part of a community support network. There's no dependence here, legal or otherwise. Callista felt something unclench in her chest. You think we can win? I think we can show the truth, Henry said. And the truth is on your side. But Liam wasn't content with legal defense alone. He wanted to build something bigger, something lasting. One evening, over coffee in Callista's small kitchen while Astrid slept, he outlined an idea. I want to start a foundation, he said, focused on single mothers, medical support, job training, childcare, not charity resources, tools. Callista listened, her hands wrapped around her mug. And I want you to help design it, Liam continued, not as a face, as an architect. You know what works and what doesn't. You know where the gaps are. Why me? Because you've lived it. And because you're still standing. She thought about it for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay. But not as your project. As ours. Ours, he agreed. They called it the Rose Foundation. Bridget Harris, a PR consultant Liam trusted, helped shape the narrative. She was sharp, ethical, and had no patience for exploitative storytelling. We're not doing the fairy tale angle, Bridget said firmly in their first strategy meeting. No rags to riches, no damsel in distress. We're focusing on capability, resilience, and systemic support. She turned to Callista. You're not a symbol. You're a co-founder. We highlight your expertise, your lived experience, as the foundation of this work. Oliver Grant, a journalist with a reputation for integrity, reached out for an interview. Bridget vetted him carefully before agreeing. I want to write about what you're building, Oliver said. Not about your personal life. Not about romance or rescue. About the work. Callista appreciated that more than she could say. But then Clinton made his move. The custody petition arrived by courier. It was thick, official, and full of language designed to hurt. Unstable living conditions, dependence on a non-family male figure, inability to provide consistent care. Callista read it and felt her world tilt. He's lying, she said to Henry, her voice shaking. He's taking things out of context and twisting them. I know, Henry said calmly. And we're going to prove it. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Gwen Carter, the social worker assigned to the case, conducted home visits. She was stern, meticulous, and utterly fair. Gwen interviewed Callista, toured the apartment, reviewed Astrid's medical records, and spoke with Amanda about the care plan. She asked hard questions about finances, support networks, and long-term stability. I'm not here to judge you, Gwen said. I'm here to determine what's best for Astrid. So tell me the truth. Callista did. She talked about the late rent, the unpaid bills, the fear that kept her awake at night. She also talked about the job training program she'd enrolled in through the Rose Foundation, the stable schedule she was building, the community she was part of. I'm not perfect, Callista said, but I'm her mom. And I'm doing everything I can to give her a good life. Gwen made notes, her expression unreadable. The night before the hearing, Clinton sent an email. It was short, brutal, and designed to intimidate. Drop the fight, or I release the photos. There were no photos, not real ones. But the threat was clear. He'd manufacture evidence. Twist reality. Do whatever it took to win. Callista stared at the screen, her hands shaking. Liam, sitting beside her, read over her shoulder. He's bluffing. You don't know that. I do. Because liars always overplay their hand. And Henry's going to bury him. What if he doesn't? Liam turned to face her. Then we tell the truth. Louder, clearer, until everyone hears it. Astrid wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. She'd overheard more than Callista realized. Are the bad pictures going to make you sad, Mama? Callista's throat closed. She knelt down, pulling Astrid into her arms. There are no bad pictures, sweetheart. Someone's just being mean. But we're going to tell the truth. Always. Astrid nodded against her shoulder. The Rose Man says, truth is stronger than lies. Callista looked up at Liam, tears on her cheeks, and saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not pity, not even love, exactly. Belief. The courtroom was smaller than Callista expected. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a judge who looked tired before the day even started. Clinton's lawyer went first, painting a picture of instability, dependence, and poor judgment. He cited the late rent, the emergency hospital visits, the questionable relationship with a man Callista barely knew. Henry Whitaker listened, taking notes, his expression calm. When it was his turn, he stood and methodically dismantled every argument. He presented medical records showing consistent care, Amanda's testimony confirming Callista's diligence, and Gwen Carter's report detailing a stable, structured home environment. He entered evidence of Clinton's financial irresponsibility, years of missed support payments, ignored communication, and sudden interest only when it became convenient. Then he called Callista to the stand. She spoke clearly, without apology. She talked about her work, her plans, her love for her daughter. She didn't hide the hard parts. The late rent, the fear, the nights she didn't sleep, but she also didn't apologize for them. I'm not perfect, she said, but I'm present, every single day, and that's more than he's ever been. The judge listened, made notes, and asked questions, probing, but not unkind. Finally, he turned to Clinton. Mr. Reed, what's your plan for custody? Childcare arrangements? Work schedule? Support network? Clinton stammered. He hadn't thought that far. The judge sighed. This case is about a child's welfare, not a financial loophole. Custody remains with Miss Monroe. Mr. Reed, you're welcome to pursue a visitation schedule, but it will be supervised and contingent on participation in a court-mandated parenting program. The gavel came down. Callista felt her knees buckle. Henry caught her elbow, steadying her. Outside the courtroom, Liam was waiting. He didn't say anything. He just handed her a single white rose. And she took it, holding it like a lifeline. But the victory was bittersweet. Within days, a gossip blog picked up the story. Single mom and billionaire modern fairy tale, or bought custody. The article was full of innuendo, half-truths, and ugly speculation. It painted Callista as opportunistic and Liam as naive. It reduced their entire relationship to a transaction. Bridget called an emergency meeting. We can sue for defamation, but it'll drag things out and keep you in the headlines. Or we can go quiet and let it die. Or, Oliver Grant interjected, I write the real story. He'd been working on a long-form piece about the Rose Foundation, and he offered to publish it now, shifting the narrative from scandal to substance. I'll focus on the work, Oliver said. The programs you're building. The women you're helping. The structure and sustainability of it. I'll mention your story as context, but not as the point. Bridget considered. It's risky, but it's also smart. Callista looked at Liam. What do you think? I think we tell the truth, he said. Like we promised. Oliver's article ran the following week. Roses don't fix poverty, people do, was the headline. It was thorough, well-researched, and compassionate. It detailed the Rose Foundation's model medical support, job training, legal aid, and highlighted Callista's role as a program designer. It mentioned Liam's involvement, but framed it as partnership, not rescue. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in. Not from wealthy benefactors looking for tax breaks, but from ordinary people giving $20, $50, $100. Single mothers, working parents, people who understood. The gossip blog story faded into irrelevance. Clinton, facing legal consequences for his email threats, quietly withdrew from Astrid's life. Henry ensured the court orders stood, protecting Callista from future harassment. And slowly, carefully, life began to stabilize. One evening, weeks later, Callista closed harbor and hearth alone. Helen had given her more responsibility, better hours, and a small raise. It wasn't much, but it was progress. She climbed the narrow stairs to the roof of the building, where the cafe kept a few tables for staff breaks. The city stretched out below, lights flickering on as dusk settled in. Liam was already there, sitting on the edge of a table, a bouquet in his hands. Not red, not white, pink and white together, soft and hopeful. White for healing, he said when she approached, pink for gratitude. Callista sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I didn't arrive by accident, Liam said quietly. I arrived because you gave me a reason to. Finally, I was on time. She looked at him, this man who'd shown up in a storm with roses and regret, who'd stayed even when she pushed him away, who'd built something meaningful instead of just throwing money at a problem. Stay, she said. Not to save us. To be with us. He set the roses down and took her hand. I'm not going anywhere. She kissed him then, soft and tentative, tasting rain and hope and something that felt like home. 1 year later, the Rose Foundation held its official launch event. The community health center on the east side was small but bright, with exam rooms staffed by rotating doctors, a job training lab with computers and mentors, and a childcare center painted in cheerful colors. Dozens of people filled the space: mothers, children, volunteers, donors. Amanda Price was there, along with Gwen Carter, Henry Whitaker, and Bridget Harris. Even Helen Brooks had come, looking proud despite herself. Astrid, now 6 and thriving, walked up to the microphone with a bouquet of paper roses she'd folded herself. These are for the man who always arrives on time, she said, her voice clear and sure. Liam knelt down to receive them, his eyes bright. Then he stood, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small box. The crowd went quiet. He turned to Callista, who stood beside him on the small stage, and opened it. The ring inside was simple, elegant, with an inscription on the inside band she couldn't yet see. I spent 6 years being late to everything that mattered, Liam said. I don't want to be late to this. Callista's breath caught. Will you marry me? He asked. Not because I saved you, not because you needed me, but because we built something together, and I want to keep building it. With you. She nodded, tears streaming, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. Later, when the crowd had dispersed and the three of them walked home through the quiet streets, Astrid between them, holding both their hands, Callista finally looked at the inscription. On time. She laughed, the sound bright and free, and Liam grinned. Above them, the city lights flickered like stars. Behind them, the foundation they'd built stood solid and real. And ahead of them stretched a future they'd write together. One choice at a time. The roses had been the beginning, but this messy, complicated, beautiful life was the story that mattered.